Hello and welcome to the Tough Girl podcast, which is all about motivating and inspiring you. I'm your host, Sarah Williams. The Tough Girl podcast is sponsorship and ad-free thanks to the monthly financial support of patrons. To find out more about supporting the Tough Girl podcast, please do go and visit Patreon, patreon.com/Tough Girl podcast and help me to increase the amount of female role models in the media. All patrons will get their name on a dedicated patrons page on the Tough Girl website. All female patrons $5 and above are invited to join the closed Facebook group, the Tough Girl Tribe. Today, I'm delighted we're going to be speaking with Selene Yeager, the fit chick, pro mountain bike racer, author, and all-American Ironman triathlete.
Where to start? Well, I am a writer and a rider. I mean, that's pretty much what my life consists of most days. I write professionally for Bicycling Magazine, where I have been giving training, fitness, nutrition advice since 1997. I've been with them a long, long time. I also write books. I co-author books. I a rider of all sorts of bicycles. I have done a triathlon, and then I moved to mountain bike stage racing, and now I do a lot of gravel racing. That's a very popular thing. Do some cyclocross. I have a fat bike. So yeah, that's pretty much me in a nutshell. I'm a coach, trainer, all those things too.
Were you in your family quite big into cycling when you were younger? Is that where it started for you?
No. I grew up in the Poconos in Pennsylvania, and I loved to ride my bike. Like I was just that kid that rode my bike everywhere, even when everyone got driver's licenses. I mean, I drove my car sometimes too, but I always had this interest in seeing, like, oh, I wonder if I could ride my bike to my friend's house that's 8 miles away. I wonder if I could ride to the lake that's 10 miles away. I wonder if I could ride to that party that's 20 miles away. I don't even know where that came from. My grandfather had a little bit of that in him too, but we were just kind of oddballs because people just didn't ride bikes like that. I didn't know people raced bikes. My mom and dad are not at all sport oriented. My dad is naturally strong, and he was a bodybuilder in his younger days, but they didn't do any athletics at all. And I played ball sports. I played field hockey. I was on the track team. So yeah, it was just sort of in my DNA somehow.
When you were growing up, did you ever think that this would be your profession, to be a pro mountain bike racer?
Oh, no. No. In my wildest dreams, I could not have penned the life that my life has become.
Did you have many female role models growing up? Were there many? Because I'm just trying to think if there.
No, I mean, no. I guess I just accepted that because I grew up. I had one brother. There were only boys in my neighborhood. There was one girl that I played with here and there. She was, but she liked to do stuff outside too. So we would just shoot hoops and do that kind of stuff. I wasn't particularly what I'd call outdoorsy, quote unquote, but I was always outside, no matter what I was doing, if it was hitting my hockey ball around or whacking a tennis ball off, a building kind of, that was just how I was wired.
When did that all start to change for you? When did sport start becoming a bigger part of your life? Was it sort of a transition from leaving school to going to college, or, what happened around that time period?
That's a good question. I actually didn't. So I left high school, and when I went to college, I didn't play any sport, and I really didn't ride my bike. I went to a large university. I went to Penn State, and I didn't really have room for it, and it seemed like I just, I walked everywhere. And that was sort of the time of when people did a lot of aerobic dancing kind of classes. So I got involved in that, did some jazz dance in college, so just that kind of stuff. I ran here and there, but I wasn't at all, that was just sort of a secondary, not even tertiary thing in my life at that point. I was much more interested in studying and frankly partying. So that was kind of my college existence. And then when I moved out of college and into my working life, I picked up a bike again. I was like, wow, I remember that I really enjoyed doing this. And after a couple of years of working in medical publishing, I got hired at Rodale Press, which is the publisher of Prevention, Bicycling, Men's Health, Runner's World, Women's Health, all those magazines. And that is where that changed my life. There's no question that I would not be doing what I'm doing now had that job never occurred. That I met the people, I met my husband, I met the people who said, you should really consider racing bikes when I was just riding this crappy hybrid. And I was like, I don't even know what racing bikes means. My life just changed completely.
They always say, you can end up becoming, the 5 people that you surround yourself with is who you can end up becoming like. So, being surrounded by everybody who's got such a passion for bikes and for racing and for health and fitness and everything else must have just been incredible.
Oh, no, it was frankly very, very incredible. And I think also in those moments, you realize that you're home. Like I realized that I was like, wow, these are my people. I didn't even know I had people, but look, they're all around me.
Yeah, it must have been so powerful. Where did the Ironman come in? Because I can see on your website that you went to the World Championships and you first woman in the Ironman in Louisville.
Yeah.
Tell us more about your transition into that sport.
Well, that was just funny. That was all kind of a lark after a lark after a lark. So once I was at Rodale Press, I'm self-employed now, but I worked for the company for about 3.5 years before I just flew the coop to start my own thing. But during that time, I was running and I was riding and I started swimming because they had a deal with the local community pool that we could use it in the mornings. And a friend of mine said, I think I'm going to do this triathlon. I was like, wow, that sounds really badass. I don't know if I could ever do anything like that, but that sounds cool. And it was in the back of my mind. And then I was at some cycling summit and there was a woman who had done Ironman there. And she was like, you should just do it. And I was like, okay, not Ironman, but just a triathlon. So I did. And I loved it. I thought it was just ridiculously fun. Just like jumping out of the water and onto a bike and then running. I thought it was just really cool. And then one day, and I did a few of those, I worked up to even a half and I was like, I don't know about doing a whole full thing. But then I was like working at my computer one day and I came across an article just like I would write 16 weeks to Ironman, and I was like, oh, 16 weeks, I could do that. And I remember even opening my window, my husband was outside in the yard and I was like, I think I'm going to do an Ironman, like literally just looking at this article. And, I realized I started looking at the training plan in it and I didn't understand any of the language that they were using about swimming. They had these swimming workouts and I was like, I have no idea what this means. Like, what is 2x25, blah, blah, blah. So like, I should get a swimming coach because my swim was not great. I was really just not drowning. I would get out of the water last and get on my bike and make up all my time on my bike. So I hired a swim coach who was also a friend of mine. And she said, my husband, Craig, is an Ironman coach and he could help you out. And I was like, okay. So I sent him like the results that I'd had in past triathlons and some stuff. And like I was racing bikes a bit at that point. And he shot back. He's like, you could qualify for Kona with these times. And I was like, oh, I didn't want to hear that. So 16 weeks became a year. Like we planned out and that too was a transformational journey because in my mind, I was just going to survive this thing. I just wanted to tick it off, like to see what it was all about. And I learned how to swim and that was amazing, like really swim. And, I followed, that was the year, I call it the year I did everything right. I did every single workout they gave me to the letter. And in my mind, I was just like, I'm going to win this thing. I'm going to go to Kona. And I did, so it was crazy. It sounds so crazy to say it, but it felt almost predestined. Like in my head, I was like, there's no alternative. Like that's where I'm going. And Louisville is one of the only, if not the only Ironman that is a time trial start because you start in this little off a dock. It's like a little inlet that goes into the larger river, so they can't get everybody in there at the same time. So everyone just sort of like lines up at 3 a.m. or something. And it takes forever to get in the water. But my point being is when I finished, I didn't know where I was in the field. Like I didn't finish and be like, oh, I won my division. I didn't know. So it wasn't until much later that I got the news that I had won.
Are you competitive?
Yeah, it's so funny. If you ask my friends, then they'll say yes. If you ask me, I'll be like, I don't consider myself competitive. I'm not one of those people that loves competition. I have friends who competition makes them tick. They love it. They turn everything into a competition. I am not like that. I'm very goal oriented and I like challenges, but that's personal. Like it's never about beating other people. You know what I mean? Like it's about being my best.
Do you know one of the things that I loved about that is that when you, because I've had friends who've done this, not with me, but when other friends have talked about, oh, I want to do an Ironman, generally the first response is, oh, why would you want to do something like that? And it's, it's a long way to run, cycle and swim.
Yes, it is.
But then what I love about your friends is your friend who's, your husband, I'm assuming, he's being super supportive. You speak to your friend who's a swimming coach and then she's, encouraging you. Then she's putting you in contact with her husband who's an Ironman coach. And it just seems to be in such this supportive, encouraging environment, which I just think is so amazing. You said that it was the year that you did everything right. How did you manage to maintain sort of the motivation and making sure that everything did go right? Were there tough times during that year or any setbacks that you had to go through?
That's an interesting question because I can be very single-minded when I put my sights on something, and I was very single-minded with that Ironman endeavor, which meant in the water at 5:30 in the morning, 3 days a week, sometimes 4. There's a period in Ironman training where that's it, that your life is pretty much enveloped in it if you're going in it competitively. And I will be 100% transparent that my marriage was not in trouble, but it was the hardest place that we had ever been in, because I was all of a sudden much faster than my husband, so we weren't riding together anymore, and he missed me, and that was hard. That was really hard, and that continued to be hard because after that success, I got picked up by a mountain bike racing team, and that took me to Africa and Brazil and all over the world. And he was largely incredibly supportive, but it took a lot of conversation. Because there were times that he would be like, I just want you to slow down. I just kind of want this to stop because I miss you. And I said, we have to figure this out because if I don't pursue these things, I'm going to resent you for the rest of my life. Like, I know this isn't forever. And I just was like, we have to just keep. So we just kept talking and we figured it out. I figured out how to incorporate him into my training and not to be so single-minded and selfish when it came to that. But it took a lot of communication, and it doesn't surprise me when I see people who, there's definitely people who go down that Ironman thing and they're just sucked into it and they lose, people lose jobs, they lose their marriage. It takes a lot of, you have to pull yourself back a little bit sometimes and look at things in the bigger picture. Was that more than you wanted?
No, that's amazing. And I love it. No, because it's so real and it's so honest, because sometimes I think people think it's almost easy to take on these challenges and make these commitments, but actually it will, as you've demonstrated, have impact on other areas of your life, especially when you are focused and single-minded and you're goal-driven and you know what you want to achieve.
Yeah, and I'm a mom too. I have a daughter, so she was 6 probably at the time.
I sort of hate even asking this question about, getting the balance, but actually, for women, how did you balance everything? With, having your daughter, your husband, your job?
I let a lot of the balls fall.
Yeah.
I willfully let them fall, Sarah. I realized early on that something had to give, and that was going to be having a magazine. Not that I ever was trying to have a magazine presented house, but I was like, I don't care about this. I don't care that my office is cluttered at this moment. I let that stuff go and concentrated on just the things that were important, like time with my daughter, time with my family, taking trips with them, and to be 100% frank, my mom. I mean, without her, I don't think I could have done any of it. She doesn't live too far away, and she happily watched my daughter on weekends, sleepovers and that kind of thing. And to this day, they have a very great relationship. My daughter just turned 18. And they still text each other, and she still asks if she can go. I mean, the hardest part of this COVID thing for my daughter is not being able to see my mom.
I can see on your website that I can see all like your endurance sort of endeavors and your mountain biking and Ironman went from like 2008 to 2015. What happened around 2015? Did you retire then or stop or?
I started a transitionary period and I stopped updating that website. There's more stuff that could be on there. Cause I did a big race across Michigan. I've done other races. Around 2015 though, I left the team per se that I was on and started just racing independently again. And I pivoted a bit to, like I said, the longer gravel things. I had done Dirty Kanzo once, which is a 200-mile gravel race. And I did it again in 2017. I did a race across Michigan, which was 213 miles. That was 2 years ago. So yeah, I'm still doing things. That website is not reflective of everything that is going on.
Tell us more about the gravel racing.
The gravel racing is very, very fun. I loved the mountain bike racing, but at some point, I started to not enjoy just riding my bike anymore because I was always thinking about racing it, So if I was having not a great day, I'd be like, oh, I don't know. I was burning out on that, so I needed to change it a little bit. So I picked up the gravel racing because it was something new. It was something very engaging, and the community is just so fun. I don't know if you've ever done or been to one, but it's basically you're on drop bar bikes, with fatter tires was the best way to describe it. And you just go to these, you could get to see such beautiful places. Like who would think that 200 miles in Kansas would be really beautiful, but it's really, really beautiful. It's just so starkly beautiful. And, Arkansas and Idaho, and you just go deep into a place on dirt roads and, sometimes even a little bit of single track trail. And it's like a giant adventure. It's kind of what has kept me going in all of these sports. Like, I just like the whole adventure of it.
Yeah. With the sports that you're doing, there's such an endurance element, which is obviously, hugely physical, but it's also like the mental side of it. And I'd love for you to maybe share a little bit more tips and information around your mental resilience and where your single-minded focus comes from and your dedication.
I don't have an answer to all of that because I believe very firmly some of that is just genetic. My brother has a very single-mindedness too, but it's just to other things. Like, my whole family, barring my mother's not like any of us, but my dad, my brother, and I are just that way. That's just the way we are. When we get into something, we sort of like dive in all the way, for better or for worse, whatever that looks like. But to answer your larger question about the mental component, I think that's everything in these endurance races. And you have to really want to be there, I think, is the biggest thing, because there's definitely been races that I have started, like especially races that I've done again and again. I don't tend to repeat races because of this, where I'll start and I'm not wildly competitive, like I said. So I have to figure out, like, what do I want out of this? Because I know I'm going to suffer 5 or 6 hours into this thing, like, why am I here? And I think the biggest piece of having mental resilience is knowing why you're there to begin with. Because if you don't have a why, you're not going to finish. I think most people who pull out just do because they're just like, what am I doing? Like, this sucks. I'm miserable. And they just quit. And I'm not questioning that. Like, of course, like if you don't have a real reason to put yourself there, then you're not going to stay there.
I spoke with a fabulous lady. I believe she's a good friend of yours, Dr. Stacey Sims.
Oh yeah.
Absolute legend. So it's a co-authored book with you, Raw: How to Match Your Food and Fitness to Your Female Physiology for Optimum Performance, Great Health, and a Strong, Lean Body for Life. I'd love for you to share a little bit more about that book and how it came about and your part in it, your role.
So it's a funny story because as I mentioned earlier, I'm a USA Cycling licensed coach. And as part of that, you have to get continuing education credits, to keep your certification. And I routinely would go to the USA Cycling Summit. Every 2 years, you get a bunch of credits and you can just renew. And to be very frank, they were starting to get pretty old. Like you'd see the same people talking. It was a bit of and it just was, if someone's probably going to at me about this, but it was an old boys club for many years where you would just kind of see the same guys talking. And I went, I think it was 2014. It was 2014. And a friend of mine who I stayed with in Colorado Springs was like, "You're going to love Stacey Sims." He had already known her, James Herrera. I was like, great, because I could use something new at this thing. So I went in and I watched her talk. And she was talking about menstruation and periods and like stuff that I had never heard come out of anyone's mouth at any summit I had ever been at. Like no one talked about that stuff. And I was like, she is captivating, and just, you could tell this was her life work. So she left when the presentation was done. It looked like sort of like she was some sort of messiah. Like people were following her. There was a line out the door to talk to this woman who had said all these new things. And I got in that line and I came up and I said, "You should have a book and I'm going to help you write it." And she said, "Great, sure." And that was literally the start of our friendship. So I went out and I stayed with her for a bit. I was part of like a guinea pig for her product development when she was doing the female specific nutrition stuff. And we just, she had written a bunch on her own. So I gathered some of that. I talked to her and just did my own back research on women's participation and results in sports compared to men and all that, and just compiled that book. And it's done enormously well.
How did that change how you trained or how you approached like physical exercise and what you were doing?
I think the biggest thing for me, there are a couple of big things. One of the biggest, though, was recognizing that those times that I was struggling with, to use a big word, thermoregulation, just basically regulating my body temperature when I was racing, like there were definitely some times that I was just like, I cannot stay on top of this. I'm overheating, or that they were due to hormone phases, and that, I would just like hyperhydrate, like she talks about in the book, like to make sure that I tried to get as much blood plasma as I could and to stay cooler. Like that kind of stuff was revolutionary for me. Like just an understanding gut rot, and like sometimes like when you need to stay on top of your hydration. Hydration is power. Hydration is power. Those words are through my head all the time. And I used to have some trouble with gels, right? And I didn't understand why. So a lot of that was just very eye-opening for me personally while I was putting the book together.
Did you track your periods like while you? No.
I never had. I was so they would take me by surprise every month. I'd be like, "Oh, that's why I felt like burning the house down yesterday." Look, so it's when I started working with her, then I did start to track them a little bit more just to see the trends. But I was always like clockwork, so it became kind of obvious. Like, oh, okay, I'm bloated, and I'm having trouble with X, Y, and Z, and this is why, and this is what I should do to try to mitigate that a little bit.
What does training look like for you now? What's like a typical week? Do you have a typical week?
A typical week, I consistently train anywhere from 10 to 13 hours a week. Most of that is cycling now. I do some trail running. I haven't really gone back into triathlon. So usually I'm either trail running or mostly mountain biking on my road bike or on my gravel bike. I kind of vacillate between those three depending how I feel. I don't have, because all the races are kind of canceled right now or put off. So there's nothing really on the schedule. I had done a couple of big events. I did a 150-mile race in January and a 100-mile one in March, right before everything shut down. A couple of weeks ago, we did a climbing challenge for COVID-19 relief. So did 16,000 feet of climbing over 130 miles, raised some money. Yeah, I just try to stay. I like to have a baseline of fitness and ability. So if something does come up, I can do it. I mean, that's always been sort of what I'm about. Like, I'm not one of those people that puts stuff away and just doesn't do anything for a while. Like, I keep a baseline, because that also helps me inform my writing. It just keeps me, it keeps me sane, frankly. And then if something comes up that I need to train for, then I'll add some specificity to that. I'll make sure that if I'm doing a mountain bike event, I'll make sure I'm on my mountain bike more and trying to replicate whatever event that's going to be.
Are you doing weights as well, or yoga for any flexibility?
Yeah. Yoga's the first thing that falls off the plate, honestly. And I don't do it by myself. I just can't make myself do it myself. And my yoga studio is not yet open again. So that has sort of fallen off the plate. I lift mostly during the quote unquote off season, which is when not many races are happening, the winter. But I try to do some weights at least twice a week just to maintain, because now that I'm a little older, I've definitely noticed that it's more important. I've always been naturally very strong, and I've been able to put on muscle very easily, but it is true that over time that's not as easy. And I have definitely seen that. So it's super important for me to stay strong. That's just a value of mine. I want to be able to be strong. So yes, I'm a big proponent of weightlifting.
Just almost like linking it back to raw as well, and to the training. One of the fundamentals is, women are not small men, so it's time to stop fueling like them and eating like them. But I'd love to know what your nutrition is like. Are you paleo, vegan, vegetarian, low carb? What sort of diet or nutrition are you following?
I'm very flexible. I would never label myself as anything except I like to cook. So I don't eat a lot out, and I don't eat a lot of pre-made things. I pretty much cook everything. So if I had to describe it, it would just be a ton of vegetables and protein. That's my basis. And then I fuel my rides around that. So, I'm not carbophobic, but I don't make that the center of my, like starchy carbs. I don't make that the centerpiece of my diet either. But when I'm going to ride, I mean, I fuel my ride appropriately. And, if I'm going on a 5-hour ride, yes, I'm going to have a bagel and whatever in the morning to facilitate that.
And I'd love to ask you a little bit more about your book. So, you've obviously shared about Raw. Tell us more about some of the books that you've written and the stories that you've shared.
I write a lot of bicycling-oriented books, that are actually Bicycling Magazine branded. So I've written a book called Climb on climbing, which has done really well and was really just a fun pet project. I did another book called Gravel, which of course is about gravel riding. One of the more fun projects I did was in 2013. I raced with Rebecca Rush, who is a multi-time world champion mountain bike racer, adventure racer. She puts on her own events in Idaho. Just pretty much a rock star. She has a documentary out. I could go on and on. But we became friends at a stage race and then raced together a few times. We raced in Brazil at a mountain bike stage race and won it. And we raced in Israel in 2015, I think that was. And anyway, she was like, everyone says I should have a book. I'm like, you should have a book. And I helped her write her book. I co-authored her book in 2013 called Rush to Glory. And that was a really fun project because I had never done anything quite like that. I mean, it's a straight up memoir. And that was just a whole different headspace for me. It was fun to do.
Yeah, that's amazing. So Rush to Glory, adventure, risk, and triumph on the path less traveled.
Yes.
You talked about sort of racing in Brazil and Israel. Tell us more about racing in different countries and what it's been like over there. I'd love to hear more about the stage race you did in Brazil with Rebecca.
Yeah, those are pretty crazy. I had done quite a few. I did a BC bike race, did Cape Epic, which is in South Africa, And then I did that one with Rebecca's. A lot of them are two people teams because you're in these, you get pretty far out there and it's just a safety thing. Like, because the days are very, very long, so the race we did with Rebecca, like, you could be out there for 7 hours and, on the Brazilian countryside. And if you hurt yourself, it's good to have somebody with you. Fortunately, that wasn't a problem for us, but it's a wild scene. I feel incredibly, incredibly fortunate to have had those experiences because there's no better way in my mind to see a place than on a bicycle. I mean, you're going fast enough that it's invigorating and things are changing all the time, but slow enough that you can really, really take it in. And, in Brazil, there were wild burros and wild horses and just these animals that would run out onto the trail with you, and just be like, this is crazy. And there's, the hundreds of people participate in them. And then you get done with each day is a different stage. So sometimes you're racing point to point. Sometimes you're just doing a big loop and coming back to the same place. And then you stay at the camp, where you're just, everyone's in the village, the racer village, and you eat together and swap stories about how crazy the day was. And then you get up very, 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 very early and warm up and do it again. And it's, I loved doing that because that you're just, again, it's sort of like a very single-minded thing. You've got one goal that day, you get up and you're going to race your bike, and you get into a real rhythm of that.
How does it change the dynamic when you're out there, when it's two of you working together as a team?
It's an excellent question. It's very hard. Rebecca and I raced well in that we got good results, but she would probably, I know she would agree with me, that we also struggled because we race differently individually. I like to start a little faster. She rolls into it differently. I like to climb a little more. She's much more of a diesel on the flats, and she's much faster on the descent. So, and you have to stay together. So it takes a lot of communication. When you get tired, you start to get frustrated, right? Like it's not easy. And, like, we had great days for sure, but we also had very challenging days, where if one person's not feeling great, you're both not, you're in it together. Like, that's just how it is. And you definitely see teams come undone. You see people start to yell at each other and stuff because it's just fatigue. Like, if your teammate has 6 flats, you have to stop every time and then help with it. If they have lots of bike mechanical problems or whatever, it can be incredibly challenging. But it's also just, a great shared experience at the same time because it's, you are both immersed in this very large thing together.
How did you deal with those frustrations when it did occur and did happen?
Once we started yelling at each other. And I was like, we should maybe not be doing this because we're both pretty recognizable people. And I don't want, like, somebody filming us with their phone and have to live with, like, look at them out in the trail yelling at each other. But it just happens. I mean, it's sport, right? I mean, people get, you get a little hot-headed sometimes, but mostly it's the same as anything else. You just have to communicate. Like, if you can tell when something's wrong because, like, you can just feel the energy is not right? So then we just talk about it and you try to make a plan. Like, okay, like, let's do X, Y, and Z and, like, try to keep it together. And that helps an awful lot because it's just like you have to have your expectations have to be on the same page. But it's inevitable that you're going to run into those frustrations and you just have to. I'm a big fan of just, like, communicating, not super emotionally, because if you don't communicate, then you end up yelling at each other in a big emotional way.
Yeah. So I want to mix things up a little bit now, and I've got a couple of quick fire questions to ask you. So my questions may be quick, but your answers don't necessarily have to be. Okay.
Okay.
Are you a morning or evening person?
Morning.
What time is your alarm going off?
I don't set an alarm. I get up. I get up with the light, so now it's my eyes open before 6 for sure. And sometimes I'll just, like, lie and doze and think about the day before I get up. But I like to be engaged in whatever I'm doing before 7 o'clock most of the time.
Do you have, like, a structured morning routine that you follow?
More or less. I mean, I have it depends. Like, obviously when my daughter was in school, that was part of it. Getting her breakfast and getting stuff together. But yeah, I mean, I get up, I walk her dog, I check. I have a little routine where I have like different feeds that give me studies that have come out and all that. Like I check my email and see if there's any things that we'd want to write about for bicycling quickly, because I cover studies. So, if there's some exciting study that's out, like I'm like, oh, okay, maybe I'll write about that today. And then, yeah, just roll in. I do schedule my week according to what projects I have. So everything is pretty loosely scheduled out. I figure out what time I'm going to ride. Sometimes I ride in the morning, sometimes I ride midday, but all of that is pretty much predetermined by the time I'm awake in the morning.
What time do you go to bed?
I try to be in bed by 11 for sure. If I'm getting up early to ride, then 10 o'clock. It just depends what I'm doing, but definitely between 10 and 11 is bedtime. I respect my sleep quite a bit, and I don't like to get less than 7. I shoot for 7+ for sure.
Are you more of a tea person or a coffee person?
Coffee.
How many cups of coffee do you have a day?
I'm a coffee person. I'm not super caffeine sensitive, so I can easily have 3 cups in the morning probably, and maybe 1 in the afternoon. I would say probably 4 a day. Maybe, I don't know. I have an espresso machine too, so I have an espresso and then I make coffee. So yeah, I like coffee.
What about a favorite movie? Is a particular movie that's impacted your life, or a movie that you'll go back to and watch again and again?
I don't tend to watch things again and again, though I will say that anytime The Shawshank Redemption comes on, I'm sucked into it. I can't say that there's any movie that has left that kind of a impact on me, though I do enjoy movies. The last movie I saw was Parasite, which I thought was amazing.
What about a book? Are you currently reading a book at the moment, or listening to an audiobook, or do you do enough sort of reading with your job?
No, I like books. I actually just forced myself through Moby Dick, and I'm not sure that was why I did that even now. A couple of my friends just rave about it. One even has a tattoo of it. I'm like, all right, I'm going to try to get through this thing again. What am I missing? And I understand why it's a masterpiece, but it really was not my cup of tea, so to speak. What am I reading right now? I'm waiting for a friend of mine to give me this book that I can't remember what it's called. Something about the cicadas that she said is like a mystery. I like a good story, so like I'm very guilty of starting a lot of books and not finishing them, because if it doesn't engage me in like 100 pages, I have a real hard time finishing it. Like I like a good story. I don't listen to audiobooks. I listen to a lot of podcasts.
What about music? Do you have a favorite song, favorite genre, favorite type of music that you like listening to?
I like music. I listen to music all day long, everywhere. It's in the kitchen. It's in my office. It's always with me. And I'm all over the map. I can't really write to words, so I listen to a lot of electronic music, like William Orbit and Lemongrass, and like sort of like ambient electronica sort of stuff. I like that a lot to write to. But I like I like hip hop. I like harder stuff like Rage Against the Machine. I like, singer songwriter music, like folk. I'm all over the map with it. It's hard to think of something that actually I don't care for.
Would you say you're more of a beach person or a mountain person?
Mountain.
No.
I'm not a big beach person.
Would you ever sort of like lie on the beach and chill for a few days? No.
No, I don't. I don't get it. I don't like it. I like to play in the ocean, and I love lakes. Like I like water quite a bit, but I get restless. I don't sit well. I mean, I sit a lot for my work because I write, but I don't just like I'm doing something. I'm not inclined to recline, as I tell my husband.
What about food? What's your favorite type of food to eat at home? And what's your favorite type of food to sort of eat when you're out on adventures doing challenges?
At home, I like to eat. I eat very simple. I just like to roast vegetables. I love roasted vegetables. So that's my foundation. And then I put whatever protein I happen to have laying around on it. I like steak, honestly, quite a bit. Like I tried to be a vegetarian many, many years ago, and I did okay, but I never felt great. I definitely am a red meat person. So I do like steak, especially after a race or even before a race. To go out, sushi would be it, because I can't make my own sushi. I mean, I could, but I don't. So that that kind of food, Thai, sushi, the stuff that I'm not really keen on making myself is what I would go out for.
And what about on an adventure or challenge? Is there, like a, I don't know, naughty snack that you take with you, like a homemade flapjack or a protein ball or something that you have on the bike?
I'll put pretty much anything in my pocket, to be honest with you. I'm definitely like whatever is around, I will stuff in my pocket. I love peanut butter, so anything with peanut butter is popular with me. We just got these. I'm not a big Stroop. I don't like super sweet things. I don't like fruity things, but we did get these Stroop waffles that were dipped in dark chocolate with espresso chips on them. And that is amazing. That was an amazing snack. That's probably the last thing that I had that I would be like, wow, that
sounds like it give you like a massive kick.
It was amazing. Yeah, it was a good thing.
What do you do for rest and relaxation?
It depends on the day. Like, honestly, sometimes my relaxation might not look like this again, is going to sound ridiculous, but I kind of like mowing the lawn. Like, we have this battery powered lawnmower, and I put in like a podcast or I put in something, and there's something oddly just brainless and meditative about it. And I like that kind of thing. Like, even cooking, like chopping vegetables and doing that kind of thing, I find relaxing. And then, at the end of the day, I like to just turn off all the screens and just kick my feet up with a book, like whatever I have going is just sort of like how I'll end the day.
What words do you try and live your life by? Do you have a mantra or like a motivational quote that's really sort of impacted you?
When I was racing a lot, or when I'm in something, it would be, don't let a win go to your head or a loss to your heart. I think that's really important. Like, both of those things are important. It's easy to slip with both of those and let a win become more important than it is and a loss become graver than it is. I also like to remind myself that these are the good days. Like, we always look backwards and like, oh, those were the days. But I'm like, those were the days then too. Like, the day that you're in is, am I making sense there? That
Yeah.
The day that you're in, you're going to look back on with some sort of nostalgic fondness, right? So yeah. I try to be present and just recall, like, I am making that memory right now, and that's important. That's part of living in the present.
Absolutely. And Selene, I'd love for you to share, where's the best place for people to find more information out about you and to follow along with all your adventures and journeys?
My professional Facebook page is probably the most active because that's where I put my everything I write. On my daily, like I write a bunch of stuff regularly, and that's where I put my new content. So that's Fit Chick Selene Yeager. On Facebook. I'm on Twitter. But I'm not a tweet person, honestly. Like, I wade into Twitter and I'm like, wow, that's a lot of hostility going on, and then I wade out. Like, sometimes I just go in to try to find. I go in to see what's going on, to test the temperature of the world. And, I follow a lot of physiologists, so I get stuff there, but I don't tweet a whole lot. And I'm on Instagram too, Fit Chick 3. And that's just usually just bike stuff, just me sort of showing people what's going on behind my eyes.
And you do also have a podcast as well. I'd love for you to maybe just to share a little bit.
I co-host a podcast called The Pace Line. And that one is about how cycling fits into your lives. So it's very broad. We just basically talk about bike life and what's going on in cycling and how it's influencing us. It's very, very broad reaching.
Selene, thank you so much for coming on the Tough Girl podcast to share more about your life and adventures and challenges and all the awesome stuff that you get up to. It's been absolutely inspiring. And I'd love for you just to leave our listeners with any final words of advice or anything that you think would help them to make sure that they're living their best lives possible.
The dishes can always wait, and you can do more than you think you can.
Hey Tribe, I hope you enjoyed the episode with Selene. What an absolute legend. Now, after we finished our conversation, Selena got back in contact and sent me an email, and there was just one other thing that she wished she had added, so I'm going to share that now with you. She goes on to say, There was a huge benefit to me digging in to pursue my passions and having those conversations with my husband. Through my events, he expanded his own cycling community and we started doing more events together. And today he puts on a big gravel race in Pennsylvania. That was all the product of us bringing each other along as we pursued our passions. So everything that we have talked about today will be available at toughgirlchallenges.com. So one of the people that we talked about on today's episode was Dr. Stacey Sims. I really want to recommend that you go and take a listen to this episode on the Tough Girl podcast. So we spoke with Dr. Stacey Sims on October 29th, 2019. She's a leading global expert on female physiology and endurance training and the co-author of Raw. And one of the key things that she talks about are women are not small men, stop eating and training like one. This is a phenomenal episode. The amount of information in this episode is incredible. I really suggest that you get a notepad, pen and paper and make notes while she's sharing this insane knowledge. I'd also highly recommend that you do get her book Raw. It is just unbelievable, the amount of information in it. But during that podcast episode, we go into talk about more about what it's like for her being an athlete and an academic, why women need to train differently. We talk about periods, menstruation, ovulation, why you need to track your periods, the mental impact of what can happen when you don't understand your body, pushing against dogma, dealing with setbacks and pushbacks, and why this book, Raw, is especially starting to gain traction now. She's also done a phenomenal TED Talk, which I'd highly recommend as well. The other episode that I recommend, not one of mine, but I still highly, highly recommend it, it's fantastic, is Sparta Chicks Radio. So Sparta Chicks is hosted by Jen Brown. I've also had Jen on the Tough Girl podcast. I've also been on Sparta Chicks Radio as well and shared more about my story. But Jen speaks to Dr. Stacey Sims. Her episode is number 99, and that is titled Dr. Stacey Sims on how to work with your body, not fight against it. I think it's a really complimentary episode. And to be honest, I would go into your podcast host or wherever it is, type in Dr. Stacey Sims and listen to all of the podcasts that she's done. It is phenomenal amounts of information available for you to hear. Anyway, massive thank you to everybody who is supporting the Tough Girl podcast. The reason I'm able to put out this incredible content and speak to these amazing women around the world is due to the financial support that I'm receiving every month from the patrons of the Tough Girl podcast. We are getting so close to 300 patrons, which is absolutely amazing. And you can support from $2 a month, $5 a month. It really does add up and make a huge amount of difference having a regular source of income coming in. All patrons will get their name on a dedicated patrons page on the Tough Girl website. And like I mentioned earlier, female patrons $5 and above are invited to join the Tough Girl Tribe, a closed Facebook community that I run, and where previous guests are invited to join. It's a really supportive, encouraging, to be honest, it's an amazing environment. There's so much knowledge in there, and so I love it personally, but obviously I would. But please do think about signing up if you can. I'd also highly recommend that you do hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any future episodes, which come out on a Tuesday 7 a.m. UK time and Thursday 7 a.m. UK time as well. Tell one friend about the Tough Girl podcast. But wherever you are, whatever you are doing, give it your all, give it 110%, go for it. You are the only person who can make it happen. I'll be back with you next Tuesday. Take care. Lots of love. Bye.